It's so horribly terrifying. At the end, you'll be dead from fright. It won't matter if you think you are immune to horror or think nothing will scare you. I once thought that way too. That was before I read this story. I am a horror junkie. I'm obsessed with the genre. I've spent countless nights staying up and watching horror films and reading scary books. I've seen it all. Ghosts, demons, anything that goes bump in the night. And I've laughed it all off. Not a single one has ever frightened me, not one bit. To me, they're simply action movies that sometimes never have a happy ending. And they're never, ever real. Now, sometimes a well-written jump scare in a horror movie manages to startle me, and occasionally I cringe when I turn on the local news, but I've never, ever been scared for more than a few minutes. Like I've said, I'm a horror nut. I recently graduated from high school, taking a job at the haunted house at a nearby amusement park. My dream is to become a great horror novelist, but so far I've turned up with absolutely nothing other than discarded ideas and a few flaky short stories, which brought a scrawny following on social media. Nothing compared to the big shots, though, and definitely not enough to make it a career to fulfill my dream. And as I'm sitting here writing this, it occurs to me that that dream will never, ever be realized. The world will never know my budding literary genius because of that story, that cursed story. I'd loved reading horror stories on social media and online before this happened. Staying up late, eyes gazing at the latest terrifying concoction of words that some amateur author wannabe hacked out, shivering at the good ones and laughing at the terrible ones. It was one of my favorite pastimes. My parents had left me when I was a young kid, and I had lived in a shoddy, run-down orphanage until I turned 18, largely keeping to myself. I suppose that was why I was never scared of horror. Nothing could be worse than what I had lived through. Nevertheless, I managed to etch out a living doing something that I relatively enjoyed, made a few people I'd be willing to call friends, and life wasn't actually all that bad. Then one night, it changed. I came across the story. It was an ordinary night sometime in fall. I had just come home from a particularly exhausting shift at work and began browsing through Reddit. The first story, right at the top of the list of new posts, caught my eye. It was labeled, "The Scariest Horror Story." Scary? Huh. I almost scoffed. Yet, the story almost had 60 upvotes despite having only come out an hour ago, so it probably wasn't child's play. I decided to check it out and see if it was worth anything, convinced of my immunity to scares. That was the biggest mistake of my life. The plot started out fairly standard. A young high school dropout was being stalked by something the author referred to as the spots. Nothing to be afraid of, really. Just a stock standard story. Yet, something was off. I couldn't tell what it was, but I felt a shiver shoot up my spine as I read. For the first time, I began to feel true fear. Not the wimpy, soft kind, like being afraid of toothpicks or the dentist, the true, raw kind. The kind that seeds throughout your body like a knife and cuts away at every single nerve in your body. I actually tried to look away at one point, but my eyes were glued to the screen. I didn't know why. I couldn't explain it. What made this story so scary? I still don't know to this day. It could have been that the main character resembled me in almost every way. A young orphan, living in a tiny apartment with an obsession for horror. It could have been that despite there being almost no description of the creature in the story, I could picture it far too vividly in my mind, almost as if it was standing right next to me. A black, ghostly figure, hovering a few feet off the ground almost like a cloud. The image was fuzzy, but I could tell it wanted nothing more than to harm me. A faint buzzing noise signaled their presence nearby. If you were close enough to hear the buzzing, you were dead. In fact, the vivid imagery was the case with the entire story. I could picture it in my head, almost like I was watching a movie rather than reading a book. Yet, the words were average at best and mediocre at worst, like the author put absolutely no effort at all into choosing their words. But I think the most likely reason of all was the silence in my head. Every time I read a horror story or watched a movie, my brain would instinctively reassure me that it's not real, that it's just fiction, nothing to be afraid of. That part of the brain was dead silent. Nothing. No reassurance, no calm words, no confirmation that this was fake in any way. I was speechless. This had never happened before. I kept scrolling, almost entranced by the words, until I got to the final few words. I suddenly shivered as I read them, sweat erupting from my body. I immediately deleted the tab and closed the laptop, gasping heavily. I gazed at the clock. Almost midnight. Bedtime. On a normal evening, I would have leapt straight into bed without a second thought after a horror story. But for the first time in my life, I had trouble sleeping. That night was a living hell. I couldn't sleep or get out of my bed from fear, hiding under the covers and watching the hours on the beady red clock slowly tick by. I jumped at every little sound. The AC kicking in, a few cockroaches scattering around the floor, looking for any scraps of food. Even the wind blowing outside made me nearly piss myself. My brain was active all night, dismissing all kinds of noises, real and imaginary alike. Worst of all was the pattering in the window. Occasionally, during the night, just when sleep was about to overwhelm even my utter fear, there was a very faint pattering sound on the window. The noise was very shallow, barely even audible. I couldn't tell if it was real or a figment of my hypersensitive imagination. Once again, though, after every faint patter, my brain was absolutely silent. I felt a deep sense of dread rush through me after these, and buried myself in the covers and didn't come back out until dawn. I showed up to work a mess. My boss asked me what was wrong, and I said I didn't sleep last night. Of course, he didn't believe my explanation. I was sort of well known by the park staff for being unafraid of anything. He joked that the only thing that I was scared of was working and told me to get back to work. Being unable to refute his claims and not wanting to damage my courageous reputation, I made up a half-baked excuse and went to work. I was driving back home on my way from work when I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a small, black blurry dot. Instantly, I turned around and looked, but there was nothing there. Luckily, I didn't crash and arrived home safely but bewildered. What was that dot? Was it? I shivered and sprinted into my apartment building. I felt a heavy presence on my back as I ran in, like I was being watched. I turned around as I entered, catching once more a faint black shape on the furthest corners of my vision that disappeared once the rest of my eyes caught up. I shivered in fear. The story said that the creature first appeared to its victim via a small, black dot in the corner of your vision. Was this a fear-based hallucination? Or, I didn't want to even think about the alternative. The story described the victims of the spots. Nothing but a few dried husks were found, human bodies sucked absolutely dry. Their eyes and mouth were missing, leaving blood-soaked holes of pitch-black darkness. Their bodies twisted into painful, inhuman poses, their empty mouths frozen in horror. Then those who saw the bodies began to see the spots too. The author survived longer than most. He watched the bodies appear, no one discovering what happened to them or the perpetrator. I had to know more. I rushed to my laptop, flipping open the screen and loading up Reddit, flipping open the story. The story was gone. Deleted. Frantically, I wildly scrolled through the stories, trying to find it, but it was no use. Eventually, I gave up, slumping down in my chair. Why did I read it? What was happening? And was that? I jumped up and looked out the window. Gone. There was another dot, except this time there was another one with it. 2 inky, floating dots. I gulped, wondering if I was again hallucinating. They disappeared in a fraction of a second. Could they be a trick of the light? I tried to convince myself that I had seen nothing, that my eyes had just played tricks on me. But once again, my brain was silent. I tried to relax. Maybe I should just try and get the story out of my head, and everything will be fine again. I picked up a series of nice and scary films and placed it in, and my brain kicked in once again, acknowledging the fiction of the movies I was watching. But the messages were different this time. Oh, those ghosts aren't real. Unlike the spots. Zombies can't tear through human flesh. The spots can though. That giant spider won't kill you. But the spots certainly will. I groaned and clutched my head, trying to focus on the movie. I tried to think of anything else, but all I could think of was the movie in front of me. I was helpless to stop the voice in my head, which I was beginning to wonder if it was even mine at all. Vampires aren't real. They are based off of spots. Just a bedsheet. Spots are completely tangible. I've seen better effects in spots. This horror movie sucks like how spots suck their prey. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned off the TV and the voice stopped instantly. Spots swam before my eyes, and in a panic, I wildly flung my arms at them, actually letting out a small scream. They disappeared, and I think they were only from dizziness. I think the next few weeks were a living nightmare. Spots appeared and disappeared in and out of my vision, at random times during the day and at night. Every time I shrieked and made a fool of myself and ended up getting fired from my job. I still haven't shaken off the story. It haunts me to this day. Recently, the spots have been multiplying, growing from 1 or 2 to 5 and 6 per glance, and then gradually increasing in number and ferocity. Yesterday, there appeared to be about 200 in the vague shape of a human behind a bush. They didn't even bother to disappear when I look at them now. I'm writing this from my bedroom. I don't have much time left. I have given up denying it. Now that my brain has acknowledged what's going to happen, I feel oddly peaceful. I don't know if it's because of mere acceptance or because of the voice numbing my brain somehow. It's been whispering to me for the past few days and growing in intensity. But unlike before, when my consciousness assured me that the horror movies were false, now my brain was doing the exact opposite. It is real. It is undeniably real. There is no scientific or logical answer as to why it would be otherwise. The story is alive. The spots are coming. The story is back. I checked 3 days ago, and the post was up again. It was deleted yesterday. I know it will be back again and again. So, I'm giving a warning. If you see any posts with the title, The Scariest Horror Story, do not click it. Do not open it. And above all, do not read it. Please. It truly is the scariest horror story. Because this one is beyond real. This one is infectious. The spots are real. They are evil. And they are here. All of them. I can hear the buzzing.